I'm happy that things are getting a little bit back to normal.
All right, let's hope people can easily fly to Israel very soon.
Yeah, I think, you guys are going through an interesting, like it seems to be, you haven't got this variant and things are opening up. It's like we're on the opposite cycle. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we get started? Okay, let me bring up the okay. So we were looking at the Imrei Yaakov commentary on this halacha from yesterday about not being allowed to open up a window opposite another window with various different stipulations. And we had said that when the last thing that we learned yesterday from the Imrei Yaakov is that while it's permissible to open up a door or a window on the other side of a public thoroughfare if they're both on the ground floor, what you shouldn't allow, what is not allowed, is to open up a retail establishment where a guy is just sitting on at the entrance the whole day, peering into his friends' affairs. That's also not proper. It can be blocked. So we'll take a look at the likutim over here with special cases. B'chalon keneged chalon. You're not supposed to establish one window opposite another. Ayin Imrei Yaakov le'inyan ha'afela shetzarich laharchik shelo ya'afil. As we mentioned in the Imrei Yaakov commentary, you're not allowed to halachically set up a wall, erect a wall that will block your friend's sunlight that he gets through his window. Now, but we also pointed out that the Gemara really only requires a distancing of 4 amos, which is only about 6 feet, which doesn't really address a lot of issues. It doesn't really address the issue of the height of the wall, the width of the wall, how much sunlight comes into my property. None of that is really taken into account if it's just a question of how distant the wall must be from my window. But be that as it may, that's why you have city ordinances and a city council that can adjudicate these kinds of matters. But then he writes, "V'imhaya lo chalon muchzekes, uba chaveru ubana kenegdo o mitzdadeha, below harchaka, b'shasak bala chalon." What if a person has a window on his house and a fellow comes along and puts up a wall and the owner of the house with the window says nothing? He says nothing. So Einu Yachol Lachzor Ula Arer Laharchik HaBinyan. So if he's silent, he does not have the right to later lodge a complaint. Shekeven Sheshasak Mochal. Since he was silent, that's a sign of his tacit approval. She'ein Adam Asui Shesosmin Oro Bifana V'Vishosek Eli Imkein Mochal. Because why would a person be silent when his airspace is being blocked off, unless he is forgiving of it, unless he's prepared to forego it? And so, how much time has to elapse? No, immediately. A person has to protest immediately, probably within a day of realizing what's happened. There's others argue, there is an opinion that says that if the owner of the window has a document or a deed that says that he has a right to have that window there, then he can bring a case later on, and the other party would have to make a claim that he's legally acquired the right to put up the wall, either because the city allows it or because this fellow did not protest. In other words, it sounds like what he's saying is that this could be taken to Beis Din, even if the guy was silent for a certain period of time. And as long as the fellow who owns the wall can make his claim, that the guy was silent and didn't say anything, so the Beis Din will allow him to keep the wall. And you have to consider that once the wall is built, it's a tremendous expense to have to dismantle the wall. So the fellow needs to make his claim immediately upon the realization that this wall is going up. Okay. Keneged Chalon, another point that he wants to make over here. Ayin Imrei Yaakov, v'im chaver zakuk l'rishayon b'niyah. He says, we talked about in the Imrei Yaakov that you can, the same thing, that you can lodge a protest if someone is building close to your property and is blocking your airspace or is blocking your sunlight. He says, v'im chaver zakuk l'rishayon b'niyah. Let's say in order to be able to build this new structure, your neighbor needs a permit from the city. And in order to obtain it, needs the neighbors to consent to, let's say he wants a variance or something like that. He wants to build on a property and he wants to get a variance so that he can build out a little bit or do something different that the city would not normally allow. So Rashai l'sarev lachtom lo im ze gorim lo nezek o inochot. So I, as a neighbor, have every right to refuse to sign. I, as a neighbor, have every right to say, no, this is creating an inconvenience for me. This is creating a compromise on my quality of living in my own home, because by you putting that structure up, you're going to be blocking my sunlight. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be doing that. And so, no, I am not willing to sign. And even though you're a frum yid and you brought me a potato kugel before Shabbos, I still am not interested in having you put up this structure right next door to me. And this is true even if halacha permits him to build there. But if there's a city ordinance that requires him to get my permission, then I'm not obligated to sign off on it. I'm not obligated to do you a favor if it's going to cause me harm or even inconvenience. The al kol panim rashai lidrosh pitzui avor chatimato. Nonetheless, and I'm sorry, what he means to say is like this: if you want me to sign, I have every right to ask for compensation. In other words, you're from, I'm from, we're part of the same community. You want to build something that requires me to sign off on it. I tell you, I'm not interested in signing off on it. This is an inconvenience for me. This is an intrusion. Okay, so you put pressure on me. I at least have the right to ask for compensation. You want me to sign, it's going to cost you X number of dollars. Now, what about a situation where it's not creating inconvenience for me? Am I still obligated to sign off on behalf of my neighbor? He says, so then I have to be able to come up with a reasonable argument as to why I don't want to sign. Is it, it's not an inconvenience, but maybe it's increasing density. Maybe it's an increasing, it's taking away parking space on the street. Maybe it's going to increase the lighting on my street. There could be a number of reasons why I think that this is not something that's in my interests or in the interests of the neighbors, and therefore I don't really have a strong desire to sign. Maybe I just don't want you as my neighbor, right? So all of these kinds of arguments, they're very subjective, and if a person is not sure whether he's just being a jerk for not signing, or whether he has a legitimate reason, he should go to a posek, he should go to a rav discuss the issue with him, and follow some objective direction. Okay, so that's and related to this is dayar sherotze livnot al hagag. Let's say a person there's an apartment building, and he wants to put an addition on the rooftop of the apartment building. Eino yachol lichpot al hashchenim sheyimker lo et chelkam uzchutam bagag. He cannot compel the other residents to sell him their rights to the roof. Every member of the apartment building has rights of access to the roof. The roof may be a very desirable area. You go up there, you can get a nice breeze, take a lawn chair, put it on the roof, but what he wants to do, this guy, is he wants to buy from each resident, from each tenant of the building. He wants to build some kind of personal use for the rooftop, and wants to go to each resident and each tenant and buy the rights to the rooftop from them. And there's this one old lady that doesn't want to sell her rights. Okay, she's completely within her rights. Okay, rak b'derech shichnua v'ratzon tov. It has to be only through the power of persuasion. There's no halachic right that you have just because you've gotten 90% of the tenants to sign off on it. Doesn't mean that one person who wants to hold out is obligated to do so. My son is in the commercial real estate business, and he tells me that when he purchases, let's say, a multi-tenant building, he has to pay off various individuals in order to get them to move out so that he can rehabilitate the building. And everyone has their own price point. Every tenant is entitled to compensation for the inconvenience of having to move out, and different people hold out for different amounts. There's no obligation to inconvenience myself just because you want to succeed in a business venture, and there's no and just because all of the other people have done it does not create a compelling argument for why I have to do it. So he says, "Va'ayin sham ba'os aleph legabi livnos neged askamas hashchenim yishayich lomer dekofen al midas dom." And so Rav Vosner has a tshuva about this whole idea. He says, if a person wishes to construct something or to create something as an add-on to a building, and he's gotten most of the tenants' approval, is there an argument of kofen al midas dom? That now this term appears in the Gemara in a number of places. What is midas dom? The trait of a sodomite. People of Sodom were notorious, according to the Medrash, for being not only miserly, but just for no really good reason to begrudge others the opportunity to benefit. So there's a principle of zen nehene b'zelo chaser. If I benefit and you don't lose anything from it, you have an obligation to allow me to benefit if it's no skin off of your nose. If there's no loss to you, you can't stop me from benefiting. But that has limited applications. What if you have a very large property, okay? And on your very large property, you don't use the back quarter of your lot. So can I say to you halachically, since you don't lose anything by letting me use your property, you have to allow me onto your property? No, of course, that's patently absurd. So obviously this halacha has limited applications. It's when you're seeking my approval to do something, and I lose nothing by giving you that approval. So sometimes halachically, I can coerce you or through the courts to sign off on it. But again, it's limited. So if there's a creation of inconvenience, even though the other neighbors feel it's fine and they're willing to take compensation for it or just to sign off on it, does not mean that you can take me to Beis Din and say, well, look at all these other people who don't mind, so you shouldn't mind either. He says, "Tesvirle dezelo shayach sheyivater adam mishalom mamash mitam kofen al midas toma sham." I don't have to forego or forgive my own property or my own property rights, just because I'm not losing anything from it, like the roof access or any other kind of situation like that. He says in the footnotes in Samach Zayin, he's quoting from that Shuva. He says, "V'im hadavar nasa al yedei beistin shu mekubal be'ir al yedei kol hachugim or al yedei kol habatei dinim yachad." He says, let's say there's a consensus among all of the batei din in the city, or there's a consensus of the city council that this is a proper thing for the neighbors to allow. Yitachein de efshar. He says maybe there a person could coerce a neighbor to sign off on it. However, but as Rav Vosner points out, it's very difficult to create that scenario in the real world. A person could come up with any reason to protest someone taking over a portion of property that he has rights to. And so therefore you cannot make the halachic argument that just because you're not using it means that you have to sign it off to me. No, I don't. I don't have to sign off something that I have rights to just because presently I'm not using it. And that's not called midas dom. Trying to remember what the classic case of midas Sodom is. I think it has to do. I'm trying to remember. I know it appears in Bava Basra when it comes to neighbors and property rights, but that's where I'm doing something on my property, and you don't have a right to protest if it's not causing you any loss.
So, Rabbi, there's you may know of a practice or a law here called Tama 38. I don't know what the reference is. So Tama 38 is the revitalization of buildings, and it it allows a developer to use the roof rights to build on top of it. So if you have like a 4-story building, which is very common, you can put 2 stories on top of it, and then you have to make it earthquake proof. You have to give every tenant a mahmad, and you need 67% of the tenants to agree to it.
Interesting. What is a matmad? Is that sort of like a subsidy?
No, it's like a shelter, bomb shelter in your home. Matmad. Oh, maybe that's a store. Maybe I have the wrong name. Maybe that's a storage room. So you basically have to put in a sheltered room, an elevator, and make it earthquake proof. And the developer gets the top 2 stories for free. And and at the time the law came out, apparently a lot of real estate agents went around the cities, around the country, and they would go door to door to convince neighbors to sign up for this Tama 38 rights. And then the real estate agent would sell it to a developer for like $1 million, and he would be able to then go in and revitalize the building. And it goes from a dumpy old building that was built in the 50s in a hurry to a modern, beautifully landscaped building with all these additional amenities. But you only need 67% of the tenants, of the owners, to agree, and everybody else has to go along with it.
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, it's very possible. When did this law come out? Do you remember?
It's been a long time, like 10 years, maybe. It's just about to expire, and there's a big controversy about whether to renew it or not. And of course, they're waiting for a budget.
Interesting. I mean, look, it could very well be that that this is what Rav Vosner was addressing. I mean, this goes back beyond 10 years, but it could be that there were other laws like this where people wanted to build onto a rooftop, and this was a constant issue. And maybe this Tama 38 was instituted because there was too much of an outcry from builders that if I have to get 100% approval, it's never going to happen. You know. But anyway, but halachically,
But it's interesting because you have to live, like you're in this building, then you have to live through 6 or 7 years of construction.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not pleasant. Yeah.
So, and I was thinking about, what about the neighbors? Nobody ever goes to the neighbors and asks them, is it okay if I make my building 2 floors higher, or, create a disruption in the neighborhood for 4 to 6 years.
Yeah. Okay, let's just look at a little bit further, and then we'll have to go. B'makom she'ein chavero rashai livnot al pi din, rashai lifnot li'iriyah l'shilton la'akev alav. He says, when my neighbor has no right to build in the way that he is proposing to build, then I have every right to go and inform on him to the authorities, to the city, to prevent him from building. It's not called a problem of Masira, right? But if whenever possible, it would be better first to try and resolve this by taking him to a Jewish court before to compel him to stop, if that's feasible. Uvamakom shal pi hadin mutar lo livnot, v'rak al pi hachok asur lo. He says, what if halacha permits him to build, but the city ordinance does not permit him to build? Okay, so v'hadavar gorim lo ezen nezek o sevel, and his putting up of his structure is causing me harm or is causing me inconvenience. Sarach ion im mutar lo lifnot li'iriyah kedei la'akev hadavar. So he says it's not really clear whether I have a right to prevent him from doing what he wants to do. In other words, let's say there's a city ordinance that you're not allowed to build a fence higher than a certain height, but halacha doesn't place such a restriction. Can I prevent my friend from doing it if halacha permits him, but just that the city ordinance doesn't? So I would have said without looking at this, 100% you're allowed to. Whenever you purchase property, you are tacitly agreeing to comply to the city's restrictions. But he's quoting a tshuva here from the Avnei Nezer where it doesn't seem that clear. He says the illustration that he gives is chugon shachein mechatzar acheret shemitkarev elav b'bniyat kir umonea mimenu avir o ma'afil alav. He says, let's say a neighbor is putting up a wall near my property and is blocking the breeze or is blocking the sunlight. And even though within halacha he's abiding within the parameters of halacha, because he's distancing his proposed wall 4 cubits, 6 feet from my property, but it's still creating an inconvenience for me. It's still depriving me of my quality of life in my residence. So am I allowed to prevent him from doing it if he's complying with the halachic restrictions, but not abiding by the city ordinance? It's obviously if he's building it without a window. But he says, but it could also be that I am allowed to report him to the authorities because he has to abide by the rules of the minhag hamakom, the customs and conventions of the place where we live. If I was brought this shaila, I would say absolutely, unquestionably, you're allowed to report him to the authorities. Why should you have to be inconvenienced just because he says, well, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, it allows me to put up this wall, but the city doesn't. The zoning doesn't allow you. So it seems to be a no-brainer. I'm not sure why he's even equivocating on this. I will have to hold it here